TIFU by accidentally sending a deeply embarrassing text to my mom, who then forwarded it to my entire family. I had a bad day. Scratch that, a horrible day. It all started when I got a message from my best friend, Sarah, about a new meme we had to check out. She has a sick sense of humor, and we usually send each other the most ridiculous memes and jokes. As usual, it was a meme about something slightly inappropriate, and I couldn't help but laugh out loud in my room like a madman. But I guess my timing was a little off. At the same time, my phone was blowing up with work-related emails and texts from clients. I work as a freelance web developer, and there's always a constant flow of tasks coming in, but I had fallen behind because of some personal stuff. So, I was scrambling to get back on track, replying to emails, fixing bugs, updating websites, all that fun stuff. My phone was vibrating non-stop in my hand. So when the message from Sarah popped up, I just reflexively tapped on it and opened it. The meme? Well, let's just say it was about a very adult situation that wasn't exactly family-friendly. I'm talking about something most people would probably laugh at, but definitely not something you want to send to a relative, or at least, I didn't want to. So, naturally, as I was laughing at the meme, my mom sent me a text. She does this thing where she texts me random "how are you" messages at the most inopportune times, almost as if she has a sixth sense for when I'm trying to get work done. I quickly swiped over to the message to reply. But in my flustered state of juggling between the meme and work, I made a critical mistake. Instead of replying with a simple "I'm good, how about you," which was the plan, my thumb somehow slipped, and I ended up sending the meme to my mom. And, of course, she instantly replied with, "What's this?" It felt like time stopped. My heart sank into my stomach. I immediately regretted everything. I panicked, swiped to delete the message, but it was too late. The red delivered tag was already on the message. I had just sent the most inappropriate meme to my mom. The type of meme that was borderline NSFW and definitely not something she'd find funny. Now, some backstory. My mom and I have a pretty decent relationship, but we don't exactly share the same sense of humor. She's one of those people who still thinks shucks is an acceptable curse word and who gets offended if someone even whispers the word damn in front of her. So, as you can imagine, she wasn't going to be laughing at a meme that involved a rather graphic joke about a chicken and an adult situation. I was already regretting it when my phone vibrated again. It was my mom, who had just typed, "Are you okay?" I immediately started typing an apology, something along the lines of "Oh, no, that was meant for Sarah. Sorry. Please disregard it." But before I could finish, I heard a ping. Then another ping. And another. I froze. I looked at the screen. My mom had forwarded the meme to my entire family group chat. For context, my family is huge. I'm talking about a group chat with over 20 people in it, my aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and even distant relatives I barely speak to. I stared at my phone in horror as I saw the little gray bubble icon appear, followed by a string of "what" and "who's messaging this stuff," and the inevitable "is this a joke" messages. I could feel the ground beneath me start to crack open. It was like one of those nightmares where you can't move, but everything around you is crumbling. My family is very, very conservative. The kind of family where we all still get together for Thanksgiving and debate whether watching the new Marvel movie is appropriate for the kids. The idea of sending something even remotely inappropriate was a level of chaos I had never even imagined. I tried frantically typing an apology to the group chat, but my hands were shaking too much. I could already see my grandma typing something, and my anxiety skyrocketed. If there was one person in the family I absolutely did not want seeing this, it was her. She's sweet but very old-fashioned. The last time I said hell around her, she made me apologize to the whole family for my foul mouth. I couldn't let that happen. So, I quickly ran out of my room, grabbed my laptop, and tried to log into the family group chat through WhatsApp web to delete the message. I don't even know why I thought I could delete it, it was way too late. I just wanted to hit delete so badly, but it was just an exercise in futility. By the time I got the chat open on my laptop, it was too late. My aunt was already calling me on my phone. I picked up the call, heart racing, as she yelled, "What the heck did you send Tom?" I apologized immediately. "I'm so sorry, Aunt Linda. It was a mistake. It was supposed to go to Sarah. Please, I didn't mean for anyone to see that." She sighed and said, "It's fine, honey, but why would you send that to your mom? That's not okay." She seemed more confused than angry, which I guess was a small blessing. Then my mom called me. Her voice was tight, which meant she was very displeased, but trying to hide it. "What in the world was that, young man?" she asked, her tone a little sharp. "Mom, I swear it was an accident," I said. "I didn't mean to send it to you. I was just trying to reply to Sarah, and my phone slipped, and, well, it's not just me who's seen it now," she said, a bit too calmly. "I hope you're ready to explain this to the whole family." And that's when I realized the damage was done. My family's group chat was buzzing non-stop. I could see the messages coming in, most of them expressing a mix of confusion and laughter. My cousin Rachel, ever the bold one, had already posted the meme on her Facebook page. I could feel my cheeks burning as I knew I would be dealing with this for the rest of my life. That night, my family grilled me about the meme. My aunt kept asking if I was really okay, my uncle sent me multiple memes about how nothing stays secret on the internet, and my dad, who had just discovered WhatsApp, kept asking how to unsend messages. The worst part? My mom kept sharing the meme with every single person she encountered over the next few days. Every phone call with a relative started with, "So, what's this about that weird meme you sent?" My cousin, who I'm very close to, even joked, "You should get a job in meme making after this." I guess I learned my lesson. Never trust my phone when it's near my mom, especially if I'm trying to handle a meme and work at the same time. It's been a few weeks since the incident, and I think my family has finally moved on. Or, at least, that's what I keep telling myself. But every time I see a family member, I'm still greeted with a chuckle and a raised eyebrow. TLDR, I accidentally sent an inappropriate meme to my mom, and she forwarded it to our entire family. Now I can't go to a family event without getting awkwardly reminded of it. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. It started like any normal Friday evening. I was working from home, trying to get through some of the last bits of the week's assignments before the weekend kicked in. I had just finished a meeting and was taking a quick break when my phone pinged with a text from my buddy Jake. "Yo, man, you free tonight? Let's hit the bar, grab a couple of drinks, and catch up." I hadn't seen Jake in a while, and I figured why not. It had been a long week, and a cold beer sounded good. I texted him back, "Sure, I'm in." "What time?" He replied with a simple, 8 p.m., at the Rusty Tap. See you there. Fast forward a few hours. I'd wrapped up my work for the day, thrown on a semi-nice shirt, which felt like a big effort given the fact that I'd been in sweatpants for the past 3 days, and was ready to head out. I grabbed my wallet, keys, and phone, then shot Jake a quick text, "On my way." The Rusty Tap is one of those classic dive bars you always find in small towns. Dark, cramped, but with a weird charm. It had that perfect mix of old-school neon signs, sticky floors, and the kind of regulars who act like they own the place. When I walked in, Jake was already sitting at the bar, nursing a pint of beer. He waved me over. "Dude, I've been waiting forever," Jake said with a smirk. Had to fend off the bartender's unsolicited advice about my life choices. I laughed and took a seat next to him. The bartender, who was a middle-aged guy with a thick beard and a permanent scowl, gave me a nod. I ordered a beer, and we started chatting. Small talk mostly, just catching up on the usual stuff, work, life, people we both knew. At some point, the conversation shifted to our mutual friend, Ryan. Ryan's a guy who never fails to surprise you, but not in the good way. He's the type of person who will show up to a party with a pet iguana and make a presentation about it, complete with PowerPoint slides. So when Jake brought him up, I was a little nervous. "Have you talked to Ryan lately?" Jake asked, leaning in a little closer. Not since that whole squid incident at his place," I said, shuddering at the memory. For context, Ryan had gotten a pet squid that he insisted was low maintenance and then tried to cook it himself. It was a disaster. Jake shook his head, laughing. "Yeah, I heard about that. But no, I mean, he called me earlier today. He's going through something." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jake lowered his voice. "He said he got into some weird stuff and that it might be better if we just didn't talk to him for a while." "I don't know. It's kind of freaky." That was a little strange, but it didn't totally surprise me. Ryan's life was a roller coaster, and if he wasn't getting into weird situations, he was probably planning the next one. "Well, maybe he's just stressed or something," I said, trying to brush it off. We continued talking about Ryan for a bit longer, then quickly shifted to other topics. Hours passed, and I had a couple of more beers than I'd originally planned on. The night was starting to blur together when Jake suddenly stood up, his face pale. "Dude, we need to go," he said, his voice tight. I blinked, confused. "What? Why?" Jake looked at me, eyes wide. "We need to leave. Right now." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "What's going on?" Before he could answer, the door to the bar slammed open, and in walked Ryan. He was holding something, no, wait, it was a large sack of some sort, and he looked absolutely unhinged. His hair was wild, his eyes were wide, and his clothes were a mess. "Guys," he shouted, waving the sack around like it was the Holy Grail. "You won't believe it. I did it. I really did it." Jake and I both froze. I was trying to figure out if I had somehow imagined what I was seeing, but Ryan was real, and he was, well, he was holding a large, wriggling sack that could only mean one thing. "What the hell is that?" I asked, my voice sounding more nervous than I meant it to. Ryan's face broke into a wide grin. "I've figured it out. I've got the answer. I've got a pet octopus. This is going to be a game changer, you guys." Jake and I stared at him. There was a long, awkward silence as Ryan continued to hold the sack in the air like it was some kind of prize. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice flat. "Ryan, what the hell are you talking about?" Ryan didn't even seem to hear him. Instead, he started explaining, almost excitedly. "You don't get it. I've been doing some research, and it turns out you can get octopuses as pets, but they need constant stimulation, and I have just the plan. I'm going to teach it tricks. Like a dog, but smarter. And, yeah, I might have had to break into a few places to get it, but that's not important." By this point, I was starting to question whether I was dreaming. I mean, I've done some weird things in my life, but this was next level insane. "Ryan, you broke into, where?" Jake asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Ryan's face suddenly looked more serious, and he nodded. "Yeah, so I might have borrowed it from an aquarium. But don't worry, I'll return it once I've trained it. I just needed to get some practice in first." Jake and I exchanged a glance. "You can't just steal an octopus, dude," I said, though I wasn't sure if this was the time to point that out. Ryan ignored me, his eyes glued to the sack. "Oh, and I may have also brought a backup." At this, he opened the sack and pulled out a second wriggling bundle. I couldn't believe it. There, in Ryan's hands, was not one, but two octopuses. It's at this point that I really should have known we were in over our heads. We tried to get him to leave, tried to talk some sense into him, but Ryan was insistent. "I've got it all figured out. Trust me." Eventually, the bartender, who had been watching this whole exchange with growing concern, came over and kicked us out. "All right, I've had enough of this. Take your weird octopus fetish somewhere else." As we were dragged out of the bar, Ryan was still talking about how he was going to start a YouTube channel where he taught his octopuses how to play ping pong or something. The rest of the night was a blur. Jake and I both agreed that we couldn't deal with Ryan anymore. We made sure the octopuses were safely returned to the aquarium, with no small amount of trouble, but the whole situation was so bizarre, it left me questioning everything. I don't know what's worse, the fact that I spent my Friday night helping my friend break into an aquarium to steal 2 octopuses, or that he honestly thought it was going to be the next big thing. Honestly, I can't even look at an octopus the same way anymore. So, I had this insane situation unfold that I've got to share with you all. I honestly can't even believe this happened to me, and I've spent the past few days trying to figure out how I managed to screw things up so royally. It started on a random Thursday, like any other, and it ended with me nearly getting arrested and a friendship on the rocks. Let me walk you through it. I live in a pretty small town. Think quiet streets, everyone knows everyone, and we all sort of look out for each other. Now, I'm not the type to go around causing trouble, but every so often, my friends and I like to push the boundaries a little. You know, harmless pranks, that kind of thing. But this time, I went way too far. It all started when I received a text from my friend Adam. Adam and I have known each other since high school, and we've been through a lot together. He's the kind of guy who can talk his way out of any situation, which is probably why I always end up in trouble with him. Anyway, the text said, "Yo, I've got an idea. It's gonna be epic. Meet me at 4 p.m, bring the van." Now, I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell could he possibly have in mind this time? But I've known Adam long enough to just roll with it. He's always had weird ideas that somehow turn out to be ridiculously fun. So, I grab my keys, hop into my van, and head over to his place. When I get there, Adam's already waiting outside, looking suspiciously excited. He greets me with this grin, and I know right then that I'm in for something I'm not going to like. He jumps into the van, and I pull out of his driveway, ready to hear what's going down. "All right, here's the deal," he starts. "We're going to steal a garden gnome." I blink at him. "Wait, what? A garden gnome?" "Not just any garden gnome," he says, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "We're going after the big one. You know, the one at Old Man Harris's house." Now, for context, Old Man Harris is a local legend. He's this super grumpy guy who lives down the street from me, and everyone knows he has a massive collection of garden gnomes in his yard. It's kind of a joke around town, and nobody really takes it seriously. But stealing one of his gnomes? That's next level. People don't mess with Old Man Harris, not unless they want trouble. But Adam's face is so set on the idea, and I'm kind of caught up in the moment, so I just go with it. We drive over to Old Man Harris's place, and Adam parks the van a couple of blocks away. We're both wearing hoodies and baseball caps to try to blend in, though I know we look anything but subtle. As we sneak across the street toward his house, I can't shake the feeling that something's off. The whole neighborhood is dead quiet, but I figure that's normal for a Thursday afternoon. When we get to Harris's front yard, we see it, the prize. The biggest garden gnome you've ever seen in your life, easily standing 4 feet tall. It's got this ridiculous smug grin on its face, and it's clearly been there for decades. Adam grins back at it like he's already won. I'm still having second thoughts, but it's too late to back out now. "All right, here's the plan," Adam says in a low voice. We grab the gnome, throw it in the van, and get out before he even knows what happened. I look around nervously. There's no one in sight, but I still feel like we're about to get caught. "Are you sure about this? This feels, I don't know, wrong." "Trust me," Adam says, "this'll be hilarious." We'll take it to the park, leave it there, and just let people wonder how it got there. It'll be the prank of the year. I'm still hesitant, but somehow, Adam convinces me. We start hauling the gnome away from the garden, and that's when everything starts to go south. The damn thing is heavier than it looks. It's not like a normal garden gnome. This thing is made of solid stone or something. We can barely lift it, and we're both struggling to drag it across the yard. In the process, I accidentally knock over a small wooden fence that Harris has by his flower bed, making a loud crash. I freeze. Adam looks at me with wide eyes, but before we can make a run for it, we hear the unmistakable sound of a door opening. We both freeze in place, and I swear to God, time slows down. Old Man Harris is standing in his doorway, glaring at us like he's seen a ghost. "What the hell do you two think you're doing?" he yells, his voice like gravel. We drop the gnome, thankfully, it doesn't break, and scramble to get away, but Harris starts shouting for help. I don't know if he's calling his neighbors or the cops, but either way, we're in deep trouble. Adam and I bolt across the yard, leaping over the low fence, and head back to the van as fast as we can. We're both panting, hearts racing, and I can feel the adrenaline coursing through me. We jump into the van, and Adam slams the door shut. He starts the engine, and we peel out of there like we're in a high-speed chase, but just as we get to the end of the block, I glance back and see Old Man Harris standing in his driveway, holding a phone to his ear. It's too late now, we're already in full flight. We manage to get back to Adam's place, and for a few minutes, we sit there, staring at each other, trying to catch our breath. But then the sirens start. And not just a few. I hear multiple police cars approaching, and my stomach drops. I can't believe we're about to get caught for stealing a garden gnome. Adam starts panicking. Shit. We need to get rid of the gnome. We hop out of the van and run to the back, but before we can do anything, I hear a voice. It's one of the neighbors, Mrs. Thompson, who saw us running earlier. She's standing by the street, calling us out, and I know there's no way to talk our way out of this. The police arrive within minutes, and before we know it, we're both being interrogated about the theft of a garden gnome. The cops are asking us what we were thinking, why we did it, and how we could have possibly thought that would be a good idea. In the end, Old Man Harris doesn't press charges, but he does make it clear that he's not amused. I'm still feeling like a fool, but at least I'm not going to jail. My friendship with Adam is on the rocks, though, because he swears he won't ever talk me into something like that again. So, yeah, that was my week. I'll never look at a garden gnome the same way again, and I've learned my lesson the hard way. If you're ever in a situation where your friend suggests doing something ridiculous, especially involving a stolen gnome, just walk away. TLDR, got convinced by a friend to steal a massive garden gnome from a neighbor. Got caught by the neighbor, cops showed up, and I almost got arrested for a stupid prank. Never doing that again. This happened a few months ago, and it's one of those stories that still makes me cringe whenever I think about it. I had recently started dating this girl, let's call her Sarah, and everything was going great. We met through mutual friends and hit it off pretty well. She was smart, funny, and we shared a lot of the same interests. Our first few dates were a blast, and I was starting to think that this might actually go somewhere. Now, I have to admit something before I continue, I am a terrible cook. Like, I can barely scramble an egg without setting off the smoke alarm. But I'm also the kind of guy who believes that if you're going to do something, you might as well go all in, right? So, when Sarah mentioned how much she loved home-cooked meals, I thought, hey, I can totally do that. How hard could it be? Mistake number 1. I decided that I would cook her a nice dinner. Nothing too fancy, just something simple but impressive enough to show her that I could be thoughtful and maybe even husband material. I Googled romantic dinner recipes and quickly settled on a chicken parmesan. Seemed like a good idea, simple, delicious, and not too hard to mess up, right? I mean, how could you go wrong with breaded chicken, marinara sauce, and cheese? The day of the date, I got all the ingredients, chicken breasts, breadcrumbs, mozzarella, marinara sauce, everything. I was feeling confident. I even called my mom for a little advice, just to make sure I was on the right track. She gave me a few tips, and I thought I had it all under control. Then, it came time to actually start cooking. I prepped everything, breaded the chicken, set up the oven, and made the marinara sauce. The kitchen smelled amazing. I was pretty pleased with myself. I even laid out the table, lit some candles, and put on some soft background music to set the mood. I was going all out here. This dinner was going to be perfect. Here's where things start to go downhill. While the chicken was cooking in the oven, I decided to start preparing a side dish, mashed potatoes. I had seen my mom make mashed potatoes a million times, so how hard could it be? I peeled the potatoes, chopped them up, and threw them in a pot to boil. But somehow, I managed to forget that I needed to drain them before mashing. I ended up dumping the entire pot of boiling water right into the sink, only to realize I still had all the potatoes in the pot. They were now mushy, soggy, and basically a pile of starchy goo. I panicked. I tried to salvage it by adding some butter and cream, but it was too far gone. The mashed potatoes were an absolute disaster. They were clumpy, too watery, and just not edible at all. But at this point, I had already invested too much time into this dinner to back out. There was no turning back. I quickly tossed the mashed potatoes aside and decided to focus on the chicken. I checked it, and it looked fine. Golden brown, crispy, and smelling like a restaurant. I thought I had done everything right. But, as I cut into one of the chicken breasts to make sure it was fully cooked, I realized something horrifying: it was still raw in the middle. I had somehow managed to cook the outside to perfection, but the inside was cold and pink. Panic set in. Sarah was supposed to arrive in 30 minutes, and I had no idea how to fix this. I couldn't just throw the raw chicken back in the oven, it would take too long, and I didn't want to end up with even more ruined food. So, in a moment of sheer desperation, I did something I now deeply regret. I pulled out the microwave. I know. Microwaving raw chicken is a cardinal sin, but at that moment, I was just trying to salvage the situation. I put the chicken breasts in the microwave and started them on a high setting, hoping they would cook through. As you can probably imagine, this didn't work out well. The microwave turned the chicken into a tough, rubbery mess that was now even more inedible than before. By the time Sarah arrived, I had the table set, candles lit, and music playing, but my dinner was an unmitigated disaster. She walked in, looking excited and sweet as ever, and I greeted her with a nervous smile. I had to come clean right away. Hey, so, I'm not going to lie, the dinner's a bit of a train wreck. I tried to make chicken parmesan, but the chicken's a little undercooked, and the mashed potatoes are ruined, I said, holding up the sad remains of the meal I'd worked so hard on. Sarah looked at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. Are you serious? She said between giggles. I honestly thought you were going to pull off something fancy. You're the most adorable disaster I've ever met. Now, this is where things could have gone south. If Sarah had been one of those people who couldn't laugh off a cooking disaster, this would have been the end of the night. But, thankfully, she wasn't. She found it hilarious. Instead of being disappointed or annoyed, she genuinely appreciated the effort. She told me that the gesture alone was sweet, and that we could order pizza instead. So, we ended up having pizza. It wasn't what I had planned, but it turned out to be a fun night. We laughed at my failed attempts in the kitchen, and I learned an important lesson: don't try to impress someone with something you clearly can't do. The best part? We're still together. That disaster didn't scare her off. In fact, it probably made her realize that I'm human, and that I can laugh at myself. And to this day, every time we talk about cooking, we joke about my chicken disaster and how I nearly set the microwave on fire trying to cook chicken. But now? I leave the cooking to the experts, or at least to take out. Lesson learned: if you can't cook, don't try to impress someone with your cooking. Stick to what you know. I should have known better. Honestly, I should have seen the signs. But when you're caught up in the moment, it's easy to lose perspective. And that's how I ended up in the worst situation I've been in for a while. It all started on a typical Saturday afternoon. I'd been working long hours during the week, and I was really looking forward to the weekend. Nothing too fancy, just relaxing and catching up on some things. So, I figured I'd treat myself to a little home improvement project. I'd always wanted to build a custom shelf in my living room, and now that I had a bit of free time, I figured it would be the perfect way to spend the day. I'd recently moved into a new place and still had boxes scattered everywhere. You know, the usual stuff, random books, old electronics, knickknacks that I kept because they held sentimental value, even though I didn't really know what to do with them. Anyway, I wanted a sleek bookshelf to store my things, and I thought I could do it myself. I'd watched enough YouTube tutorials and read enough DIY blogs to feel confident. How hard could it be, right? The first mistake I made was that I didn't plan it out properly. I rushed to the hardware store, grabbed a bunch of lumber, screws, and tools, and headed home. My car was packed with wood brackets and more than a few bags of nails. I figured I could just wing it, get the shelf up, and call it a day. Once I was home, I started measuring out the space where I wanted the shelf to go. But my measurements weren't perfect, and I didn't double-check them. I was in a rush, eager to get started. So, after about 10 minutes of sketching and measuring, I got to work. I made a few cuts with my saw, using the first board I'd grabbed. Big mistake. It turns out that it was a little too short for the space I had in mind, but I didn't notice until I was halfway through attaching it to the wall. At that point, I had already drilled the first set of holes and was committed to the idea. I figured I could make it work. After all, the shelf would still hold my books even if it didn't look perfect. But of course, it didn't work. The moment I placed a few books on it, the shelf started leaning to one side. The screws weren't holding, and I could tell that the wood wasn't supported properly. Panic started to set in, and I realized that my dream bookshelf was quickly turning into a nightmare. Not one to admit defeat, I decided to salvage the situation by reinforcing the shelf with some extra brackets I'd purchased. Now, I wasn't completely clueless. I had learned about structural support from various tutorials, so I thought if I just added more brackets and maybe some extra nails, I could make the shelf stronger. But in doing so, I ignored one crucial thing. I didn't account for the fact that the wall behind the shelf wasn't solid enough to support all the extra weight I was adding. The drywall was thin, and there weren't enough studs in the wall to keep everything from collapsing. But I still wasn't ready to give up. I figured I could hang the shelf on the studs at either end and let the rest of it just float. I grabbed my stud finder, it had been gathering dust for a while, and scanned the wall. It beeped and flashed, indicating where the studs were. Great, I thought. Now I had a solid anchor for the shelf. I drilled a couple of holes and put in the screws, ensuring I'd found the sweet spot. Everything was set. Or so I thought. By this time, I'd spent the better part of the afternoon on this project, and I was starting to get a little frustrated. My phone was blowing up with messages, but I ignored them. It was a Saturday, and I was determined to finish this shelf. I put the rest of the wood pieces up, secured the brackets, and stepped back to admire my work. It didn't look too bad, and at least the books were on it. I took a moment to feel good about myself. But then, the moment of truth. I took a few more books off the couch and placed them on the shelf, one by one. I put a few heavier books on the far end, near the wall where the studs were. And as I set down the last book, a particularly hefty hardcover, I heard the dreaded creak. The shelf groaned under the pressure, and before I could react, the entire thing came crashing down. Books, nails, wood, and brackets flew everywhere in a spectacular mess. I was left standing in the middle of a war zone of my own making. My heart sank as I looked at the destruction. Not only had I failed to build the shelf, but I'd also wrecked part of my wall in the process. It was like a bad DIY horror movie, only it was my life. The worst part? I had a friend coming over in an hour. This wasn't just some casual visit either. She was a professional designer, and I was hoping she could help me with some ideas for my living room. I had been so proud of my little project earlier, and now the entire place looked like a tornado had hit it. I had no idea how I was going to clean up the mess or explain what had happened. In the end, I had to confess everything to her. She was, of course, understanding, though I could tell she was trying hard not to laugh. We spent the rest of the afternoon fixing the mess together. She was actually the one who showed me how to properly install the shelf with the right supports. But by that point, I was too embarrassed to care about making it perfect. Lesson learned? Don't rush into DIY projects without a solid plan. And never underestimate the importance of double-checking measurements, materials, and, most importantly, your wall's structural integrity before you start drilling holes. So yeah, my perfect weekend project ended up as a cautionary tale about how not to DIY. Maybe next time I'll just buy the shelf. TIFU by trying to fix my computer and accidentally erasing my entire hard drive, including all my work for the last 3 years. Let me set the stage. I've always considered myself at least semi-competent when it comes to technology. Not a professional, mind you, but I've always been able to troubleshoot issues when my devices start acting up. So, when my computer started to lag a bit and show some signs of being sluggish, I thought it would be a good idea to perform some maintenance on it. The problem had been going on for a couple of days. It would freeze randomly, and sometimes programs wouldn't open, or they'd crash the second they did. A few times, I even got the dreaded blue screen of death, which made me panic. But I've dealt with this kind of thing before. I usually turn to YouTube or some tech forums for a quick fix. One particular day, I decided I'd take a more aggressive approach and see if I could clean up my system and get everything running smoother. So I opened up my computer's disk management settings to see if I had any unnecessary files, partitions, or applications eating up space. That was my first mistake. Now, for a little context, I work as a freelance graphic designer, and my entire career over the last few years has revolved around my computer. All my work files, client assets, design drafts, and personal projects are stored on the hard drive. I don't use cloud storage because I'm paranoid about my work being exposed or hacked, so I back everything up manually. But, as luck would have it, I hadn't backed up in over a month. A month in the design world means a lot of work, a lot of revisions, and dozens of final drafts. But I didn't think about any of that when I dove into the disk management window. So, I'm sitting there, feeling confident, scanning through the partitions and disks on my machine. I don't know exactly what I was hoping to accomplish. Maybe a little house cleaning, perhaps removing old files or defragmenting my disk. I was just thinking, okay, time for a little spring cleaning. I came across something strange though, a partition that I didn't recognize. It was labeled Data Partition and was listed under Unallocated. I didn't remember creating that, so naturally, my first thought was, oh, this must be some leftover partition from a previous OS installation. Given that I'd upgraded to Windows 11 from Windows 10 a while ago, I figured this was an old remnant that had been hanging around and used, just taking up space. I wasn't sure if this was something I needed, but I convinced myself that it was old and unnecessary. I figured I could delete it, and the system would just regain the space. It seemed like a harmless thing to do, and I assumed it wouldn't affect anything important. I mean, it was labeled as unallocated, right? No data there, no worries. So, I right-clicked on it, hit delete, and watched as the system confirmed my decision with that ominous "Are you sure?" prompt. It was a small window. I clicked yes without hesitation. Immediately, my screen flickered, and something felt off. But I dismissed it, thinking the system was just doing its thing. That's when the magic happened. After about 10 minutes of waiting, I checked my system. All my files were gone. The entire drive. Every last piece of work, every design file, every client contract, every document I had been working on for the past 3 years, gone. I'm not sure what happened next, but the realization hit me like a truck. I started to panic. I checked my documents folder, my downloads, even my desktop, nothing. Empty. The only thing left on my computer was the bare operating system files. My heart sank. I spent the next several minutes in denial, clicking around my computer in disbelief, hoping that something had been overlooked or misplaced. But no. Nothing. It was like the last 3 years of my professional life had been completely wiped out. I tried everything I could think of. I used a data recovery tool to try and restore the files, but I quickly learned the hard way that once you start deleting partitions, recovery becomes a nightmare. I spent hours running scans, trying to piece things together, but every attempt was fruitless. The hard drive was beyond recovery. The worst part of this whole ordeal was realizing that there were no backups. None. I had meant to back up my data multiple times, but I kept putting it off, thinking, I'll do it next week, or I'll just finish this project first and then back everything up. Now, I had lost everything. Every sketch, every draft, every final design I had worked so hard on. It wasn't just the files either. I lost client emails, invoices, personal projects that had taken months of my time, and so much more. My entire freelance career was now sitting in the recycle bin of my own incompetence. I spent the next few days in a haze, unable to focus on anything. I barely spoke to anyone, I couldn't work, and the weight of losing everything slowly crushed me. I tried to piece together what I could from memory, but as each day passed, it felt like more and more of my hard work slipped through my fingers. The panic never fully went away. The realization that I would have to start from scratch was overwhelming. But, after the initial shock wore off, I did what I had to do. I started rebuilding. I reached out to some of my clients, explaining what happened. Some were understanding and agreed to let me redo the work, but others weren't as forgiving. I had to work harder than I ever had in my life to regain trust and re-establish my career. I also learned a valuable lesson: never ever delete things without understanding what they are. If there's any doubt about what you're dealing with, don't touch it. And for the love of everything, back up your data regularly. It doesn't matter how small the project seems, or how confident you are in your system, because when it all goes to hell, there's no coming back from it. So, yeah, TIFU by thinking I knew enough about computers to clean up my hard drive. I didn't. And now I'm paying the price. Hopefully, my pain can be a lesson to someone else out there. Back up your stuff. Don't make the same mistake I did. TIFU by pretending to be an expert on a subject I knew absolutely nothing about, and now my entire career is at risk. A few weeks ago, I found myself in a situation that I never thought would be so out of control. It all started when my boss asked me to help with a presentation for a big client. Let me give you some context. I work at a fairly small tech company as a project manager. I'm good at what I do, but let's just say my expertise doesn't lie in the specifics of our software's deep technical aspects. I'm the kind of person who knows enough to hold my own in meetings but always feels like the dumbest person in the room when it comes to coding or advanced systems. However, on this particular day, I made a mistake that would set off a series of disastrous events. Our company was working on this huge contract with a client who was notorious for being extremely detail-oriented. They wanted a presentation on how our software would integrate with their existing systems. Simple, right? Well, to make matters worse, my boss was out of town, and the project lead was sick, leaving me as the person to prepare the presentation. I had no idea what to do. I knew the basics of the software, of course. I had worked with it for years, and I had attended all the necessary meetings. But I couldn't pretend to be the technical guru the client was expecting. Still, I didn't want to seem incompetent, so instead of asking for help, I thought, I'll just wing it. How hard could it be? I spent the next few days cramming as much technical jargon as I could find. I read articles, watched a few videos, and even called a couple of colleagues who were much more tech-savvy to ask for quick tips. Of course, none of them had time to help me properly, but they did give me enough to piece together a few talking points. I started to feel more confident. This is it, I thought. I can do this. The day of the presentation came, and my stomach was in knots. The client was going to be in the room, and I knew they'd ask tough questions. As I stood up in front of everyone, I could feel my palms sweating. The moment I started speaking, I realized I was way in over my head. I opened the presentation slides, and I confidently began explaining how our software would seamlessly integrate with their infrastructure. I used all the fancy terms I had learned, like cloud native, microservices, and API orchestration. At first, it seemed to be going okay. I saw a few nods, and I even managed to crack a joke about a technical hiccup we had experienced earlier, which lightened the mood. But then the questions started. And these weren't your standard questions. Oh no, the client was digging deep. So, how do you handle data consistency across distributed systems when there's network partitioning? I froze. I had no idea what they were asking. I had heard the term network partitioning once or twice in passing, but I had never actually had to deal with it. My brain went into panic mode. The sweat on my forehead started dripping, and I could feel my heart racing. I quickly tried to buy myself some time. Great question. Let me just pull up the section in the presentation that covers that. I said, trying to sound confident while fumbling through the slides. But I didn't have a slide for that. In fact, I didn't have a clue how to answer that question. I tried to stall. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we prioritize scalability, and the way our architecture works, it's flexible enough to handle that situation. I said, hoping I could bluff my way through it. I watched as the client team exchanged skeptical glances. That was when I realized I might have bitten off more than I could chew. Another question came from the back of the room. We've noticed in the demo that you're using a monolithic structure in some of the components. Are you planning to migrate that to microservices? If so, what's your strategy for minimizing latency during that transition? My brain screamed, what the hell is latency? I had heard the term before, but my knowledge of it was as superficial as a puddle. I was now officially in over my head, and it was clear that my audience knew it too. I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Again, I tried to cover my tracks. Yes, we're definitely considering the transition to microservices. As for latency, we have strategies in place to optimize that, during the migration process. I quickly added, it's a high priority, and will ensure there's minimal disruption. They weren't buying it. One of the senior engineers on their team raised his hand and said, so, what specific tools or technologies are you planning to use to ensure there's no impact on performance during the migration? I blinked. I had no idea what he was talking about. I felt like I was suffocating. We'll use containerization tools, I said, hoping that was the right answer. I had read about Docker once, so it seemed like a safe bet. The rest of the meeting was a blur. The client kept asking questions, and I kept giving vague, generic answers that somehow sounded technical but meant nothing at all. I could feel the temperature in the room rising. By the end of the presentation, it was clear I had made a complete fool of myself. The clients politely excused themselves, and I could see them whispering to each other as they left. I had no idea what they were saying, but I didn't need to. Their expressions said it all. I immediately texted my boss and told him the meeting had gone fine, but I could already feel the weight of my mistake crushing me. I knew I couldn't keep up this facade forever. And I wasn't wrong. The next day, my boss called me into his office. I spoke with the client this morning, he said. They had some concerns about your presentation. They mentioned that they felt you weren't fully prepared to discuss the technical aspects of the product. I nodded, trying not to visibly panic. I understand. I can definitely follow up with them and clear things up. But my boss wasn't done. They also asked if you were the right person to be handling such high-level discussions. They felt that it might be better if we brought in someone with more technical experience for future meetings. At that moment, I knew I was in serious trouble. It was clear that I had overestimated my abilities, and the fallout from my disastrous presentation was only just beginning. My boss wasn't angry, but I could tell he was disappointed. And the worst part? I was afraid that the client might pull out of the deal entirely because of my incompetence. Since then, I've been trying to make amends. I've been taking online courses to actually learn the things I pretended to know, and I've been apologizing to anyone I can think of who might have been affected by my lies. But every time I look at my boss or hear from the client, I feel like I'm on borrowed time. The worst part? I may have just ruined my career all because I didn't want to admit I didn't know something. TLDR, pretended to be an expert on a technical subject during an important client presentation, got caught, and now my job is at risk. TIFU by accidentally sending my boss a super embarrassing message, and now I'm probably getting fired. So, a little backstory, I'm in my late 20s and work at a mid-sized tech company. It's a pretty chill workplace, and I've been here for a couple of years now. My boss is this middle-aged, pretty laid-back guy. He's a nice dude but can be a bit too informal sometimes. We have a small team, so it's mostly just a lot of email and Slack messages all day long. Honestly, I thought I had a pretty solid grip on the whole professional communication thing. That is, until this past Monday. It all started when I was texting my friend Jenna about an incident at work. I'll admit, I had a bit too much to drink the night before, so I was feeling slightly off when I woke up. I was still a little foggy and hungover when I logged in to my laptop. But I got through my morning routine, opened my email, checked my Slack, and then sat down to get some actual work done. Around 11 a.m., I took a break to grab a coffee and scrolled through my phone while I waited. I saw a message from Jenna that said, "How's the new guy at work? Any cute office drama yet?" I laughed, because honestly, there was some drama at work, but it had nothing to do with a new hire. A few weeks ago, our office manager, Sarah, got into an argument with one of the developers, Tom, about something really petty, like the placement of a printer or something. Long story short, their disagreement ended with Sarah tossing a stapler across the room. The drama had been hilarious, but it had all cooled down. Or at least, that's what I thought. Anyway, I was texting Jenna about this ridiculous office drama, when I got a Slack message from my boss, Kyle. I didn't think much of it, it was a simple request asking me to check something in a shared file for him. But here's the problem, I was in the middle of writing a message to Jenna about Sarah's stapler incident when I accidentally sent the message to Kyle instead. Here's the text I meant to send to Jenna. Sarah literally threw a stapler across the room when Tom made a joke about her bad coffee. LOL, it was like a scene from an office sitcom, but honestly, I think we all felt pretty awkward afterward because now everyone is kinda walking on eggshells around her. And here's what I sent to Kyle. Sarah literally threw a stapler across the room when Tom made a joke about her bad coffee. LOL, it was like a scene from an office sitcom, but honestly, I think we all felt pretty awkward afterward because now everyone is kinda walking on eggshells around her. Anyway, I think I need a raise because I'm putting up with this circus every day. Yep, I accidentally sent my boss a message that made me sound like I was complaining about my job while calling our office a circus in the process. And I definitely didn't mean to add that I think I need a raise part. For a second, I stared at my phone in disbelief. I had just told my boss that I thought the office was a circus and that I needed more money to deal with it. I quickly hit the undo button, but the message had already been delivered. Panic set in. I immediately opened Slack and started typing a frantic apology, but as I was doing that, Kyle sent me a message. It read, "Haha, thanks for the update. I didn't know about the stapler incident. I'll take a look at that file in a bit. And we can talk about that raise later." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was being way too chill about this. Was he just trying to brush it off? Was he mocking me? I had no idea. I decided to try and salvage the situation with a follow-up message. I typed, "Hey, Kyle, sorry about that last message. That was meant for a friend. I swear I'm not complaining about the office or anything. I love working here. Just, super awkward situation with Sarah and Tom. I'll, send over that file soon." I hit send and sat back, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could ride this one out. But then came the waiting game. I didn't hear from Kyle for a while. I could feel my heart racing every time a notification pinged. Was he talking to HR? Was he about to fire me over a text slip-up? Was I going to lose my job over this? A few hours later, around 2 p.m., Kyle finally replied. He said, "No worries, I get it. But honestly, I don't think you should be asking for a raise right now. I'd recommend saving that conversation for a more formal review. Let's catch up tomorrow." This sent me into full-on panic mode. Did he just say I shouldn't be asking for a raise? I wasn't actually asking for a raise, I was joking, but apparently that didn't come across. At that moment, I realized I had made a huge mistake. The rest of the day was a blur. I was too anxious to focus on work and just kept checking my phone to see if I'd gotten any more messages from Kyle. Every time he was offline or unresponsive, I'd start imagining the worst-case scenarios, like being fired on the spot or having my raise requests permanently ignored because of a dumb text slip-up. Honestly, the more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that this was the beginning of the end for me at this company. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, trying to figure out how I could explain myself to Kyle the next day without looking like a complete idiot. I wanted to send him another message, but I knew that would just make it worse. So, I decided to let it ride until the morning. The next day, I showed up at work feeling like I was walking to my execution. I sat at my desk, trying to keep my head down, but the guilt kept eating away at me. Finally, around 10 a.m., Kyle came over to my desk. He didn't look mad, but he had this grin on his face like he was holding in a joke. "So," he said, casually. "About that stapler incident," I immediately felt my face go red. Yeah. I'm so sorry about that message yesterday. I really didn't mean to, say that. It was a slip-up, and I didn't mean to make it sound like I was complaining about the office or anything. It's just, it's been a weird few weeks with the whole Sarah and Tom thing." Kyle laughed. "Don't worry about it. I figured it was just a funny mix-up. But seriously, I think you deserve a raise, so let's set up a time to talk about it next week." I blinked. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, I'm not worried about your text. It was funny, honestly. But I've been meaning to have a conversation with you about your performance, and we can chat about your compensation then. Sound good?" I was stunned. He wasn't mad. He wasn't even bothered by the message. If anything, he thought it was funny. The relief was overwhelming. So, long story short, I've learned 2 things from this experience. 1, always double-check who you're sending messages to, especially when you're still a bit hungover. And 2, sometimes your worst mistakes can turn into something good, like an unexpected raise discussion. Still, though, I'm not going to be joking about staplers or asking for raises in casual texts again anytime soon. Lesson learned. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by attempting to fix my mom's internet router and accidentally knocking out our entire neighborhood's internet for 6 hours. This all started about a week ago. My mom, being the typical non-tech-savvy person, asked me to come over and help with her internet router. She had been complaining about the Wi-Fi being slow for a while, and though she didn't know the first thing about tech, she had the mindset that if the internet wasn't working right, it must be the router. Now, I'm not an expert, but I know a thing or two about routers, Wi-Fi, and troubleshooting. I've been to her place countless times to help with small tech issues. I assumed this would be another minor task. A quick fix. But oh, how wrong I was. I grabbed my car keys and headed over to her house, not thinking anything out of the ordinary. When I arrived, she greeted me with her usual "I think it's broken, can you make it go faster" speech. She handed me the router, which was a fairly standard model, nothing too fancy, but a little on the older side. I could tell right away that this wasn't just a case of slow Wi-Fi. The router looked like it had been moved around, unplugged, and maybe even dropped. There was dust on the vents, and one of the lights on the front wasn't even lit up. My mom had been telling me that the internet had been cutting in and out for days, and I could see why. My first thought was to reboot the router. Most issues with Wi-Fi connectivity could be solved by restarting the device. I unplugged it, waited 30 seconds, and plugged it back in. The lights blinked back to life, and I assumed everything was good to go. But I didn't see a solid internet light. That's usually a sign that the connection was still having issues. So, I tried a couple of different things. I checked the cable connections and made sure everything was securely plugged in. Still, no luck. I decided to go a step further and log into the router's admin page. To my surprise, I found the default username and password still set, which was a bit concerning. It seems my mom never changed them from the factory settings, which is probably why the router had been misbehaving. But that wasn't the biggest issue. As I was navigating through the router settings, I accidentally hit the reset button. For a moment, I didn't think much of it. I figured, okay, this will reset it to factory settings. I'll just set it up again. But I didn't realize how badly I messed up until I hit the apply button. Without thinking it through, I proceeded to set it up again, connecting it to the network, entering the new Wi-Fi name and password, and clicking save. I hit the restart button, expecting everything to go smoothly. But instead of seeing the lights on the router flash back to life, everything went dark. At first, I thought the router had just frozen, so I rebooted it again. Still, nothing. No lights. The router was completely dead. My stomach sank. I tried everything. I even tried unplugging it for 10 minutes, hoping it would somehow magically come back to life. But the worst part? The router was part of a network that provided internet access to multiple homes in our neighborhood. It turned out that my mom's internet wasn't just a standard cable company hookup. It was a sort of neighborhood-wide Wi-Fi arrangement that ran through a shared network of routers. My mom's router was the one that connected all the other routers in the area to the internet. Realizing my mistake, I grabbed my phone and tried to get in touch with the local ISP, but they were closed. I searched for any troubleshooting steps online, but the router wasn't responding to anything. I even tried the old hold down the reset button for 30 seconds trick. No dice. My heart began racing. I realized that I had not only screwed up my mom's internet, but I had effectively taken down everyone's internet in the neighborhood. By now, it was about 5:30 p.m., and I could feel the anxiety rising. People would start to notice soon that their internet was out. In fact, I could already hear my mom's neighbor, who was also a tech illiterate, loudly complaining about the internet being down from across the street. It became clear that I was the one responsible for knocking everyone offline. So, in a panic, I called up a friend of mine who works in IT. I figured maybe he could walk me through some steps I'd missed. I explained the situation, and he laughed at first, thinking it was just a small glitch. But when I told him the router was part of a shared network, his tone changed immediately. He explained that I would need to manually reset the network configuration, and that wasn't something that could be easily fixed by a simple reset or reboot. He offered to come over and help me out, but he said it would take at least an hour to get there. I didn't have an hour. I could already hear people in the neighborhood starting to get upset. I needed to fix it fast. After a moment of frantic searching, I found the contact info for the network administrator who managed the shared router system. I nervously called the guy and explained what I had done. He sighed, but assured me it wasn't the worst thing that could happen. He asked me to leave the router as it was, so he could come over and reset it from his side. By the time the technician arrived, it was already 6:30 p.m., and everyone in the neighborhood had been without internet for over an hour. The technician walked in, took one look at the router, and began shaking his head. "Well, you've definitely managed to break it. But it's okay, we can fix it." He worked on the router for another 30 minutes before he finally got it working again. As the lights on the router flickered to life and the internet came back on, I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. The whole ordeal lasted about 6 hours. My mom's neighbors were not pleased, and a few of them even came over to yell at me for ruining their evening. I tried to explain that it wasn't entirely my fault. After all, the router wasn't exactly in the best condition to begin with, but they were having none of it. I apologized profusely, offered to pay for the technician's visit, and promised to leave the router alone next time. But the damage was done. I hadn't just failed to fix the internet. I had knocked out the entire neighborhood's access to the internet for hours. So yeah, TIFU by trying to fix my mom's internet router and accidentally causing a massive outage in the entire neighborhood for 6 hours. Never again will I attempt to fix anything tech-related without reading every single instruction manual first. TIFU, by accidentally starting a fire in my apartment and almost burning down the building because I wanted to make a simple lunch. It all started innocently enough. I had just moved into a new apartment in the city. I was excited about the new place, bigger space, nicer view, and a fully equipped kitchen that I was ready to break in. I'm no Gordon Ramsay, but I can make basic meals. On this particular Saturday, I decided I'd make myself a simple grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup. You know, the kind of meal that doesn't require much skill but feels comforting when you're alone at home with Netflix and your thoughts. I got out all the necessary ingredients: bread, butter, cheese, and a can of soup. I figured I'd start with the sandwich. I'm not an idiot, I know how to make grilled cheese. Butter the bread, slap on some cheese, heat up the skillet, and toast it until golden brown. It's a 10-minute job at most. How could anything go wrong? Well, I'll tell you how. I got distracted. I put the skillet on the burner, turned on the heat, and tossed a slice of butter in to start melting. I had to grab something from the living room, so I figured I'd be back in just a minute. But instead of a minute, I got sidetracked. I had a notification pop up on my phone, which turned into a full-on social media rabbit hole. Before I knew it, a good 20 minutes had passed. The smell of burning butter brought me back to reality. By the time I rushed back to the kitchen, I saw that the butter had completely melted and turned into a blackened, smoking mess. The skillet was smoking, and I could hear a faint crackling sound. Panic set in. My first thought was to grab the sandwich and throw it in the sink. But no, the skillet was too hot for me to even touch, and I didn't want to cause more chaos by splashing grease everywhere. So, my next brilliant idea was to turn off the burner and cool it down. Now, here's where things really went off the rails. Instead of just leaving it to cool off and handling the problem properly, I grabbed a wet paper towel and thought I could just wipe the skillet down. I know. Please don't ask why I thought that was a good idea. I reached for the paper towel, wet it under the faucet, and walked back to the stove. As soon as the wet towel made contact with the hot pan, it sizzled and, in an instant, flames shot up from the skillet. I froze for a second, completely caught off guard. I'm pretty sure my brain couldn't process what was happening in that split second. Then, instinct kicked in, and I did the worst possible thing I could have done in that situation. I panicked. I grabbed the skillet with my bare hand, instinctively trying to throw it into the sink. Of course, it was still scorching hot, and I dropped it immediately, causing a burst of flames to spread across the counter. The fire spread to some loose napkins I had on the counter, which quickly ignited as well. I could see the flames creeping up the side of the cabinets. I think I screamed. Maybe I didn't. I honestly don't remember much except feeling completely helpless. At that moment, I realized I had no idea what to do. I had no fire extinguisher, I don't know why I didn't have one, and the only thing I could think of was to throw water on it. I grabbed a cup from the counter, filled it with water, and tossed it at the flames. Big mistake. The water hit the fire and created an explosion of flames. The fire flared up, and I could see it now licking at the cabinets, and the smoke began to fill the entire kitchen. I started choking and coughing from the smoke. That's when I finally snapped into action. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator picked up, and I'm sure I sounded like a lunatic. All I could say was, "Fire. Kitchen. I can't. I don't know what to do." They told me to get out of the apartment and wait for the fire department to arrive. At that moment, I realized I was in way over my head. I bolted for the door and grabbed my keys, wallet, and phone. As I ran out of the apartment, I heard the faint sound of fire alarms going off. I didn't know if they were mine or someone else's, but it didn't matter. I just had to get out. The hallways were smoky, and I ran down the stairs, seeing my neighbors also making their way outside, looking just as confused and scared as I felt. Some of them were in their pajamas, probably woken up by the sound of the alarms. Once outside, I stood in the parking lot in a daze. I could see the fire trucks arriving, their sirens blaring. They rushed inside and began to handle the situation, while I stood there, completely embarrassed, thinking about how I had let my desire for a simple lunch turn into a full-blown disaster. The fire department didn't take long to put it out, but I was still shaking with adrenaline. A few minutes later, a firefighter came out to speak to me. "You all right?" he asked, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. "I just wanted to make a grilled cheese. I didn't think it would turn into this." He gave me a sympathetic smile, but I could tell he was used to people saying the same thing after a fire like this. "Don't worry. We've seen worse. Just make sure you've got a fire extinguisher next time, and maybe check on your food every now and then." Once the fire was out and the smoke cleared, the damage was mostly contained to the kitchen. The fire had burned a part of the cabinet, and the stove was charred beyond recognition. The rest of the apartment had smoke damage, and there was a lingering burnt smell. The fire department made sure the area was safe, and after some paperwork, I was allowed to go back in and start figuring out what the hell I was going to do next. I'll be honest, I didn't even care about the apartment anymore. I was just grateful I hadn't burned the whole building down or injured anyone. I learned some valuable lessons that day. Don't leave your food unattended, don't throw water on an oil fire, and always have a fire extinguisher within arm's reach. After everything settled, I ordered a pizza because I was in no condition to cook anything. I decided to call my mom, tell her the whole story, and get the "I told you so" speech I knew was coming. As much as she loved me, I knew she'd probably be asking me about fire safety for the next few weeks. But, hey, at least I got a pretty memorable story out of it. Maybe next time, I'll just stick to cereal. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway to recharge. I had been working non-stop for the past few months, and after a stressful few weeks at my job, I figured a couple of days in the countryside would be the perfect way to reset. So, I booked a small cabin out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but trees, nature, and the promise of a peaceful escape. It was perfect. Or so I thought. I drove for about 3 hours to get there. The cabin was charming, rustic, and had everything I needed, except for Wi-Fi, of course, which I wasn't planning on using anyway. The lack of connection to the outside world was part of the appeal. I grabbed my bags, walked inside, and immediately started to feel that sense of calm I'd been craving. The air was fresh, the birds were chirping, and it felt like I had truly left the chaos behind. After settling in, I realized that I had left my phone charger in the car, so I grabbed the keys and walked back to the driveway. As I was about to open the car door, I heard a noise behind me. I turned around and saw an older man walking down the gravel road toward me. He was wearing a plaid shirt, jeans, and a weathered baseball cap. He looked like he had been living in the woods for decades, and I immediately assumed he was one of the locals. He waved and called out to me. "You staying in the cabin?" I nodded, a little hesitant, as I wasn't used to people just walking up to you in the middle of nowhere. "Yeah, just for the weekend." He approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Nice. It's quiet around here. Don't get many visitors these days." I gave a polite smile back, trying not to seem too uncomfortable. "Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for, peace and quiet." He chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Well, you've come to the right place. Just be careful though. You're out here alone, right?" I froze for a second. Yeah." He nodded, as if what he was about to say was common knowledge. "Well, you've got to be careful at night. The animals around here can get a little curious." He paused, his smile fading slightly. "And there's other things. You'll hear noises at night, don't go investigating them. Trust me on that." I laughed awkwardly, trying to brush off his words as the ramblings of a quirky local. "Okay, thanks for the warning. I'll keep that in mind." The man didn't respond with a smile this time. Instead, he simply gave me a long, intense look. It was like he was sizing me up or trying to convey some unspoken warning. I was starting to feel a little uneasy, but I chalked it up to being in unfamiliar surroundings and his general weirdness. He nodded once more and started to turn away. "Good luck," he called over his shoulder as he disappeared back into the trees. I shook my head and went back inside, laughing off the encounter. It was a bit strange, but nothing to be worried about. I plugged my phone into the charger, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window, enjoying the view of the surrounding woods. The evening passed without incident. The sun set, the stars came out, and everything felt peaceful. But that's when the strange things started to happen. Around midnight, I heard something scratching at the door. I stood still for a moment, heart pounding, listening carefully. The noise was subtle but distinct. Scratching, almost like claws against wood. I froze, not sure what to do. Was it an animal? Maybe a raccoon or a bear? I had read that wild animals could sometimes wander into cabins looking for food, but this sounded different. Almost deliberate. I waited for it to stop, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But it didn't stop. The scratching persisted. And then I heard a thud. The door rattled slightly, as if something had bumped into it. At this point, I was getting genuinely scared. My mind raced through all sorts of possibilities. Was someone trying to break in? Was there some sort of prank going on? Or was it just an animal? I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously walked to the door. The scratching had stopped, but I felt like I was being watched. My heart raced as I turned the knob slowly and opened the door, shining the flashlight around the porch. There was nothing there. Just the dark, quiet night. Relieved but still uneasy, I stepped back inside and locked the door, double-checking it to make sure it was secure. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept hearing strange noises in the distance, rustling, footsteps, and once, what sounded like a low, guttural growl. But I convinced myself that it was just my overactive imagination, fueled by the man's cryptic warning earlier. The next morning, I decided to go for a hike to clear my mind. I grabbed my backpack, packed some water, and ventured into the woods, hoping the fresh air would calm my nerves. The forest was beautiful, but still, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling from the night before. After about an hour of walking, I came across a small, abandoned cabin deep in the woods. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. The wood was rotting, and the roof had collapsed in some places. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. As I walked toward the door, I noticed something strange, fresh footprints leading up to the entrance. The prints were large yet heavy, and appeared to be made by boots, not animal tracks. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I glanced around, but there was no sign of anyone. I debated for a moment, but my curiosity won out, and I pushed open the door. Inside, there was a dusty old chair in the middle of the room, and on the floor, scattered papers. But it wasn't the contents of the cabin that sent a chill down my spine, it was the unmistakable, faint smell of something decaying. I backed out slowly, feeling like I was being watched. I didn't want to be there any longer. I turned and started to walk back toward the cabin I was staying in, moving faster now, my heart racing. But as I neared the clearing, I saw something that made me freeze in my tracks, a figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. It was the old man from the day before. He was standing there, just out of the sunlight, barely visible. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with those piercing eyes. I didn't know what to do, but instinctively, I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was back at the cabin, slamming the door behind me. I spent the rest of the day inside, locked up, trying to make sense of what had happened. That evening, the scratching returned. But this time, I didn't even hesitate. I didn't open the door. Instead, I packed my things, grabbed my phone, and drove off in a panic. I didn't care about the money I'd spent on the weekend. I just needed to leave. I never went back to that cabin, and I never found out who or what had been scratching at the door. But I couldn't forget the look in that man's eyes when he watched me. It was as if he knew something I didn't, something that made me feel like I had narrowly escaped something worse. I don't know if I'll ever go back to the woods again. And if I ever meet someone like that old man again, I'm not sure I'll be so quick to dismiss their warnings. But one thing's for sure, that weekend getaway turned out to be much more than I bargained for. TIFU by accidentally destroying my friend's wedding day in the most awkward way possible. This all started about 2 weeks ago, when my best friend, Sarah, asked me to be her maid of honor at her wedding. I've known Sarah since high school, and we've been inseparable since then. Naturally, I was beyond excited for her. She had been dating Tom for 3 years, and they had been planning this wedding for almost a year. She was like family to me, and I was determined to make sure everything went smoothly for her big day. The wedding was set for Saturday, and everything was already stressful in the days leading up to it. There was the rehearsal dinner the night before, the flowers, the last-minute fittings. The usual pre-wedding chaos. But I thought I had everything under control. I'd been to plenty of weddings and had seen enough to know how things should go. I was ready for my role. Or so I thought. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at the venue early to help Sarah with last-minute details. I'd already helped her get dressed in her stunning white gown, and we were doing last-minute touch-ups to her makeup when I got a text from my sister, Rachel, who lives in another city. She was freaking out. Apparently, her babysitter had canceled last minute, and she wasn't sure if she'd be able to make it to the wedding on time. Rachel's son, my adorable but very energetic nephew, was being a handful, and she was desperate for help. She asked if I could somehow get to her house and help her out for a bit. She promised it would only take an hour, and I figured I could easily squeeze it in before the ceremony started. Sarah was all set up, the bridesmaids were getting ready, and I figured I could sneak away quickly. Mistake number 1, I didn't tell Sarah where I was going. I figured it would be fine since I'd only be gone for a little while. Plus, I didn't want to stress her out about something that seemed so minor. I drove to my sister's house, which was about a 25-minute drive away, and arrived just as she was trying to get my nephew to calm down. My sister looked relieved to see me, and I immediately started entertaining my nephew so Rachel could finish getting ready for the wedding. He was jumping on the couch, throwing toys everywhere, and just being a typical 5-year-old, but after about 40 minutes, he calmed down enough for Rachel to start getting ready. Of course, at that moment, Rachel had another problem: she couldn't find her dress. We spent the next 30 minutes frantically searching through her closet, drawers, and even the laundry pile. All of this was happening with my nephew running around the house, making it even harder to focus. I was stressed out and felt guilty for not being at the wedding, but at the same time, I didn't want to leave Rachel high and dry on such an important day for her too. Finally, after a good hour and a half of searching, Rachel found her dress crumpled in the corner of the laundry room, where she had thrown it earlier that week. She was still able to get dressed, but by then, I knew I was running out of time. I texted Sarah to let her know I was on my way back, but I didn't hear anything in response. So, I rushed back to the wedding venue, hoping I wasn't too late. When I got there, I noticed a few people were milling around outside the reception hall, chatting and taking pictures. The ceremony was about to begin, so I quickly made my way to the back, where the bridesmaids were getting ready. I was about to slip into my dress when I realized something horrifying. I had left my phone in the car. Now, I know this might sound trivial, but in the age of constant communication and constant notifications, leaving your phone behind can be a big deal. Especially when you're supposed to be helping out the bride and making sure everything is going according to plan. I panicked. What if Sarah had tried to reach me? What if she needed me for something important? I couldn't risk it. I quickly excused myself and dashed back to the parking lot to grab my phone. As I approached my car, I realized it was still parked way too far from the venue entrance. It was a scorching day, and I had to walk all the way around the back of the building, but I was already late and didn't want to waste any more time. As I was rushing back to the venue, my phone buzzed with several notifications. I pulled it out to see that Sarah had been trying to reach me repeatedly. She had sent several texts and missed calls, which made my stomach drop. I quickly opened her most recent text, which read, "Where the hell are you? I need you right now." My heart raced. I had no idea what was going on, but I had a sinking feeling that I was about to make things much worse. I called Sarah back immediately. She picked up on the first ring, her voice shaky with frustration. "Where are you? The ceremony is starting in 5 minutes, and you're supposed to be standing by me, you know, helping with everything," she snapped. I apologized profusely, explaining what had happened with Rachel and how I'd gotten caught up. Sarah, understandably, wasn't pleased. But she told me to hurry and just get back to the ceremony quickly. I could tell she was trying to keep it together, but I could hear the stress in her voice. I rushed back, now feeling like a complete disaster. When I entered the venue, the doors to the ceremony hall were already closed. I stood there in the back, out of breath and feeling like the world's worst maid of honor. I waited for the ceremony to start, praying I wouldn't make any more mistakes. Finally, the doors opened, and it was time for me to walk down the aisle. But as soon as I stepped forward, I realized there was a problem. I had forgotten to remove the safety pins from the bottom of my dress, and it had caught on the heel of my shoe. As I took a step forward, my dress ripped straight down the seam in the back. The fabric tore so loudly that everyone in the front row turned around to look at me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. The tears in my eyes started to well up. I could hear Sarah's anxious voice from the front row, "Oh my God, please don't mess this up." And, of course, in my panicked state, I tripped over my own feet and fell directly into the flower girl, knocking her off balance. She tumbled to the floor in a heap of confusion, and a massive flower arrangement fell on top of her. It took several moments for anyone to realize what had happened. People started rushing to help the flower girl, who was crying now. I was standing there in front of everyone, trying to hold back tears of embarrassment. The ceremony eventually continued, but Sarah was furious with me. I felt awful. She had been planning this day for months, and I had ruined it with my sheer incompetence. I don't think I'll ever be able to fully make it up to her for the disaster I caused, but I certainly learned one thing: when you're the maid of honor, stay put, help out, and for God's sake, double-check your dress before walking down the aisle. So, I've always been the type of person who tries to be overly responsible. You know, the kind of person who sets multiple alarms in the morning, triple-checks everything, and generally does their best to avoid embarrassing situations. That was, until this one fateful evening, which will forever be known as the night I made a complete fool of myself in front of my coworkers, my boss, and, thanks to the wonders of technology, the entire company. It all started with a regular workday, like any other. My company had recently adopted a policy of holding weekly all-hands meetings. Everyone from the janitors to the C-suite would be on a Zoom call to discuss the state of the company, achievements, upcoming goals, and of course, the obligatory motivational speaker slot that no one ever actually paid attention to. The meetings were long, dry, and a real drag, but it was mandatory, and I wasn't one to skip out on things like that. I'd learned the hard way that being absent from such things doesn't exactly help your career. Anyway, that day's meeting was scheduled to start at 5 p.m. I'd had a rather exhausting day of back-to-back Zoom calls and emails, so by the time 4:45 p.m. rolled around, I was starting to mentally check out. I was practically counting the minutes until the meeting would be over so I could collapse on my couch and enjoy some well-earned Netflix time. But before I got too comfortable, I realized I hadn't yet checked the meeting link and the agenda for the call, which was typical for me since I tend to procrastinate with that kind of thing. I opened my email and clicked on the invite link to the Zoom meeting. As I entered the meeting, I noticed that there were a few dozen people already in the virtual room. The CEO, the department heads, and a bunch of my coworkers were already present. I quickly muted my microphone and turned off my camera, a solid move if you don't want to be that person who's caught picking their nose or slouching during a call. I figured I'd just hide out for the next hour, listen passively, and hopefully make it through without being called on. The first few minutes of the meeting were uneventful. Everyone was talking about company growth and progress. People were using all the buzzwords, synergy, pivot, bandwidth, the usual corporate jargon. I started zoning out a little bit, and my eyes wandered around the screen, looking at people's faces, trying to figure out if anyone was as bored as I was. That's when I heard it. My name. "All right, next up, let's hear from Alex," the CEO said, calling on me. I froze. Panic set in. I had no idea what I was supposed to talk about. I hadn't prepared for anything. I wasn't even sure if there was a topic I was supposed to cover. My mind immediately went blank. I stared at my screen for a moment, frantically scrolling through my notes, trying to find some context for what I was supposed to say. The seconds were dragging, and the silence in the virtual room was becoming unbearable. People were starting to look at each other awkwardly, and I could feel the pressure mounting. I decided to wing it. Big mistake. I started talking, but nothing that came out of my mouth made any sense. I rambled about some project I was involved in, but it was disjointed and incoherent. I mentioned a few key points, but the sentences didn't connect, and I could tell by the looks on people's faces that they had no idea what I was trying to say. But that wasn't the worst part. You see, in my panic, I had forgotten to unmute myself. I didn't realize this until about a minute into my rambling, when I saw a message pop up in the chat, "Alex, you're still muted." I froze. At this point, I was already too far gone into my self-inflicted disaster to stop and correct it. I thought, maybe I could play it cool and just continue talking, but as I tried to speak, it became clear that nobody could hear me. And that's when I made the second fatal error. Instead of admitting that I was muted, I panicked even more. In an attempt to salvage the situation, I did what I thought was a smooth move. I turned on my camera. I figured if people could at least see my face, maybe they'd think I was making a point and not just losing my mind. But here's where things took an even worse turn. I hadn't bothered to check what was behind me on camera. As soon as my camera popped on, I realized, to my horror, that my bedroom was visible behind me. And it wasn't just any regular bedroom setup. No, I had forgotten to tidy up. My bed was unmade, clothes were strewn across the floor, and in the background was my laundry basket, overflowing with dirty clothes. But that's not even the worst part. In the far corner of my room, visible to the entire company, was a pile of what could only be described as intimate items. I had never in my life meant to have these things on display, but there they were right in the frame, in full view of dozens of my coworkers. And, of course, it was at that exact moment that my camera also decided to freeze. My panic escalated to an almost comical level. I started frantically tapping on my keyboard, trying to fix the situation. I could hear people in the background muttering, "What the hell, and what's going on with Alex?" But I couldn't stop the train wreck. Every time I tried to adjust the camera, I accidentally knocked over a stack of books, sending a loud clattering noise through the call. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to unmute myself. I could barely even hear my own voice as I stammered through an apology. I'm so sorry. I think I'm having some technical difficulties." No one was buying it. The CEO gave me a long, uncomfortable look. "It's okay, Alex," she said slowly. Just take a deep breath." The rest of the meeting dragged on, but I was mentally checked out at that point. I didn't even care what was happening anymore. All I could think about was the fact that my personal life had just been broadcast to the entire company. And it didn't end there. The following week, during a team meeting, one of my coworkers, who I barely knew, casually mentioned, "Hey, Alex, nice laundry pile you had there last week." I died inside. I thought I could move on, but then came the meme. Someone had taken a screenshot of my frozen camera moment, the one with the pile of laundry and everything else, and it had somehow found its way into the company Slack. It wasn't just an embarrassing picture, it was a full-blown meme, with various captions like, "When you don't even try to hide your secrets," and "CEO-approved chaos." I tried to laugh it off, but deep down, I knew I was the laughingstock of the office. So yeah, that's how I completely ruined my professional reputation in one evening. I thought I could breeze through an all-hands meeting, but instead, I managed to combine technical failure, panic, and a very public personal embarrassment all into one spectacular event. I'm still trying to live it down. Moral of the story? Always check your camera, and always check your surroundings before you hit that join button. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, just remember, it could always be worse. You could end up becoming the meme of the office. TIFU, by accidentally deleting the most important files from my dad's business and almost getting him fired. So, a little background first. My dad runs a small but very successful family-owned business. It's a printing and graphic design company, and I've been helping him out in the office every summer since I was in high school. I'm not a tech expert by any means, but I've always been the go-to person in our family when something goes wrong with computers, emails, or anything digital. I've saved my dad's business from a couple of tech-related disasters before, so naturally, I was the one he called when things went wrong again. However, this time, things went very, very wrong. It all started when my dad asked me to help him clear up some space on the company's old desktop computer. The thing had been running slower than usual, and he'd been getting frustrated with it, but he didn't want to invest in a new one just yet. I've always hated that computer because it's one of those old-school clunky models with so many folders and files that even the simplest task takes forever to finish. It's a miracle it's still running, honestly. But, being the dutiful daughter, I agreed to help. My dad told me to delete a few old files and that I'd find them in the shared folder. He didn't give me any more specific instructions, and I assumed it was a simple task. The office assistant, who handles most of the actual work on the computer, was out for the day, so I was on my own. I logged into the shared folder and started looking through all the files. I noticed a ton of things I didn't recognize: client files, invoices, designs, proofs. Some were marked as final or approved, but others were labeled as drafts or preliminary work. To be honest, I wasn't super thorough in reviewing them. I just looked for anything that had old in the file name and clicked to delete them. The computer was so slow that it took forever for any of the files to even register that I'd clicked them. I also didn't check to see if there was anything important mixed in with the stuff I was deleting. The worst part was, instead of dragging the files to the trash, I hit the delete button, thinking I was just removing a few non-essential things. Suddenly, a pop-up appeared on the screen, asking if I wanted to delete everything in the folder. Without reading it properly, huge mistake, I thought it was just confirming that the files I selected were ready to be removed, so I clicked yes. Within seconds, the entire folder of files was gone. I stared at the screen for a second, realizing that what I had just done was not great. But I didn't think it was a big deal. After all, the computer had backups, right? Right? At this point, I felt pretty smug. I'd cleared up a ton of space, and the computer seemed a little bit faster, which meant I was helping out. I called my dad into the office to show him what I had done, and I told him everything was all cleaned up and ready for use. But then he walked over to the desk and looked at the computer. His face fell. "Where are the files?" he asked, his voice suddenly tight. "What do you mean, the files?" I asked, genuinely confused. He pointed at the screen, where I could see a blank folder. No files. None of the important ones, none of the client documents, nothing. My heart sank as it dawned on me that I had just deleted the entire shared folder, which contained years of critical work, client contracts, finalized design files, invoices, everything. Without even thinking, I pulled up the trash bin, but it was empty. The files were gone. The panic hit me immediately, and I started furiously clicking on anything that would restore the files, but it was too late. I'd cleared out the folder so thoroughly that there was no trace of it left. I started frantically apologizing, but my dad wasn't hearing it. He was silent, staring at the screen in disbelief. "How did this happen?" he asked, his tone flat and serious. I could see his mind racing, trying to figure out how this would affect the business. "I didn't mean to," I blurted. "I just deleted some old stuff. I didn't know it was that important." He sighed heavily and said, "This is bad. Really bad. I need to talk to the office assistant and see if we can recover these. If we can't, I don't know what I'll do." At this point, my mind was a whirlwind of panic and self-loathing. I had ruined everything. I tried to reassure him, telling him that I'd help him try to recover the files, but he was already on the phone with the assistant, trying to figure out what they could do. I felt like a total failure. Not only had I made a huge mistake, but I was now about to make my dad look incompetent in front of his entire staff. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, frantic typing, and my dad pacing back and forth in the office. The office assistant was called back in from home, and together, they tried to find any way to restore the files. They pulled out the backup hard drive, but it turned out that the files I had deleted hadn't been backed up properly in months. They were gone. The reality started to sink in. Without those files, the business was in jeopardy. My dad was behind on several big contracts, and the invoices for pending jobs were gone. They were going to have to redo a lot of work that would cost time and money. My dad tried to keep his cool, but I could see the stress on his face. I could see him thinking about the financial impact this was going to have. After a while, the assistant had a suggestion. There was a recovery software that could scan the hard drive for any deleted files and maybe bring some of them back. It wasn't a sure thing, but it was the only shot they had. I felt a little bit of hope flicker back in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, the files weren't gone forever. We spent the next couple of hours running the recovery software, and I sat there in silence, feeling like the worst person in the world. It felt like hours before anything came back, but when the program finally finished scanning, we saw a few of the files reappearing. It wasn't everything, but at least we got a portion of it back. It turned out that most of the designs and client files were recoverable, but some of the newer invoices and communications were lost. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, my dad finally gave a tired but relieved sigh. It wasn't perfect, but the damage was less than it could have been. He thanked me for helping out, but I could tell he was still upset. He didn't say it directly, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. The moral of the story? Always double-check what you're deleting, especially when it involves other people's livelihoods. And also, maybe I shouldn't be trusted with anything related to tech anymore. Needless to say, I learned my lesson. After that, I'm pretty sure my dad will never let me near his computer again. So, let me start off by saying that I don't know if I'm just an idiot or if I was just having an incredibly unlucky day, but either way, my life is officially ruined. At least in terms of my social reputation, my job prospects, and my general sense of self-worth. I'll try to keep this as concise as possible though, if you know me, you know that's not a strength of mine. It all began last Tuesday. I was running late for work, as usual, and was scrambling around trying to get dressed. I didn't have time to make breakfast, but I remembered I had some leftovers in the fridge from dinner the night before. My mom had made spaghetti and meatballs, and I figured it would be quick and easy to just microwave that. So I grabbed a Tupperware, put the spaghetti and meatballs in it, and shoved it in my backpack. In hindsight, this was my first mistake. I had been a little too overconfident in my ability to multitask that morning, thinking I could microwave the spaghetti, eat it on my way to work, and still make it on time. But the universe had other plans. I get to the office, and as usual, the place is buzzing with people hustling and bustling around. I've always been a little socially awkward in the workplace, so I try to keep to myself and avoid making small talk. I immediately go to the break room to heat up my lunch. I pull out my Tupperware, throw it in the microwave, and then wander over to the sink to wash my hands. While I'm at the sink, I notice the time on the clock, 10 minutes past the hour. I realize I'm running way behind for my first meeting of the day, so I rush back to the microwave to grab my lunch. Here's where everything goes completely wrong. I open the microwave door and, instead of the warm and delicious smell of leftover spaghetti, I'm hit with a scent that can only be described as burnt. I look inside the microwave, and my stomach sinks. The Tupperware has melted into a blackened, charred mess, and there's this horrible black goo oozing from it. The spaghetti has completely disintegrated into a mixture of sticky burnt noodles and sauce that looks like it's been through a disaster movie. I try to take a breath and calm myself. Maybe this is salvageable, I think. So, I grab the charred remnants out of the microwave with a paper towel, because I don't want to burn myself, obviously, but as soon as I do, I realize just how much of a mess I've made. There's black, sticky residue on the bottom of the microwave now. The smell of burnt plastic and food is wafting all over the place. I start to panic. The kitchen was filled with other coworkers, and I know that they all must have heard the microwave ding. And now they're all going to know that I'm the idiot who just ruined my lunch. Now, I know you're probably wondering why I didn't just clean it up and pretend like nothing happened. Well, it's because I'm a massive klutz. The moment I pick up the melted Tupperware, it slips out of my hand and falls right onto the floor. The mess goes everywhere, and to make matters worse, my coworker, Sarah, who I have a massive crush on, walks in just as I'm standing there, holding this hot mess of burnt food and plastic in my hands. I freeze. She looks at me, and without skipping a beat, she says, "You okay there? Looks like a disaster zone in here." I'm completely speechless. My face turns bright red, and I stammer something like, yeah, I just, burned my lunch. Brilliant, right? At this point, I'm sure I'm just a walking embarrassment. Sarah gives me a sympathetic smile and walks over to the microwave. "Hey, it happens," she says. "I've burned popcorn before, too." I try to muster up a chuckle and nod, but as she leans in to inspect the damage in the microwave, she accidentally presses the button for the microwave's self-cleaning function, which has this terrible, loud whirring noise. And that's when it happens. A giant puff of smoke starts billowing out of the microwave. The smoke alarm starts blaring, and now the whole office is looking at us. I'm now standing in a cloud of smoke, the microwave is trying to clean itself in a ridiculous and loud fashion, and my lunch is ruined. I can already hear the whispers of my coworkers. "Did you see that guy? What a disaster. Poor Sarah, she has to work with him." At this point, Sarah is laughing nervously, and I'm just trying to figure out how to get out of the situation. My brain is firing at 1,000 miles a minute, and I come up with the worst idea possible. I'll pretend like it was some weird malfunction with the microwave and that I had no idea what happened. I take a deep breath and say, "I swear, I didn't do anything." I was just heating up lunch and the microwave just exploded. The word exploded should have never left my lips, but it was too late. Sarah looks at me with wide eyes and says, "It's fine. Don't worry. But maybe we should, report it or something?" And just like that, my already terrible morning went from bad to worse. A few minutes later, my boss came into the break room, took one look at the mess, and immediately started talking about how the microwave might need to be replaced. He gave me this incredulous look and said, "Did you break the microwave?" I was a bundle of nerves at this point. The smoke alarm was still going off in the background, and everyone in the office was eyeing me like I had done something criminal. I mumbled something about a freak accident, but my boss didn't seem convinced. He said, "All right, well, let's all just take a breather, and someone will clean this up." Of course, the day didn't get any better. I was the subject of office gossip for the rest of the week, and every time I tried to have a conversation with anyone, they'd either avoid eye contact or give me that awkward, "Hey, you're the guy who broke the microwave, look." My boss sent an email later that day, telling everyone to be more careful when using the break room appliances, which felt like a direct shot at me, even though he never named names. I ended up going home early that day because I couldn't deal with the embarrassment anymore. And to make things worse, I had to cancel a dinner plan with some friends that evening because I just didn't feel like facing anyone after what happened at work. Long story short, I think I've learned two things: never, ever try to microwave spaghetti in Tupperware that's not microwave safe, and definitely don't try to pretend like a microwave explosion is anything but your fault. Also, I've been avoiding Sarah for the last week, because I can't look her in the eye without thinking about how badly I messed up. I'm just hoping one day she forgets about the time I almost burned down the office over a bowl of spaghetti. I'm pretty sure that day will never come. TIFU by getting my mom and my girlfriend stuck in the same room together for hours and then having to deal with the fallout for the next 3 weeks. So, here's the context. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and I live in a small apartment with my mom, who is in her early 50s. My girlfriend, Sarah, is 25, and we've been dating for almost a year now. We have a really great relationship, but there's one issue: my mom and Sarah do not get along. It's not that they hate each other, but there's definitely a lot of tension. My mom is pretty old-fashioned, and Sarah is, well, a bit more modern and independent. They've had some awkward moments in the past, but I figured it was mostly just a small clash of personalities that would blow over in time. Boy, was I wrong. A few months ago, I decided it was finally time to introduce my girlfriend to my mom more seriously. I had been spending a lot of time at Sarah's place, and we both agreed that it would be nice to have her over for dinner at my apartment. This was meant to be a low-key, getting to know each other kind of night. You know, just a nice dinner, some wine, and light conversation. In theory, it should have gone smoothly, but of course, it didn't. The night started off fine. My mom made her famous spaghetti, and we had a bottle of wine open. Sarah seemed to be doing her best to get along, but there were these little passive-aggressive comments from my mom that made Sarah visibly uncomfortable. For example, my mom kept asking Sarah about her career, and Sarah explained that she was working at a small startup. My mom replied, "That's nice, dear. So, when are you going to get a real job?" Sarah smiled awkwardly and tried to laugh it off, but I could see the frustration building in her. The tension was palpable, and it didn't help when my mom started talking about how girls today don't appreciate the importance of a good home-cooked meal. Sarah was the picture of politeness, but I could see the edge in her eyes. The meal was finished, and we sat there for what felt like an eternity. There was an uncomfortable silence before my mom tried to break the ice with the oldest trick in the book, asking Sarah if she wanted to help her with the dishes. I could tell from the look on Sarah's face that this was a no-win situation, and she tried to politely decline, saying she didn't want to be a bother. But my mom insisted, and Sarah reluctantly got up to help. Now, here's where everything went completely downhill. The next thing I know, I'm sitting on the couch, texting some friends, when I hear raised voices from the kitchen. My heart skipped a beat. I rushed in to find my mom and Sarah in the middle of a full-blown argument. Apparently, it started with Sarah asking why my mom had such an old-fashioned view of women's roles in the home. My mom took it as an attack on her values, and it escalated from there. By the time I walked in, my mom was shouting, "If you don't like how things are around here, maybe you should go back to your own place and figure out how to do things on your own." Sarah, who is usually pretty calm, was visibly upset at this point and shot back, "Maybe you should stop judging me for having my own life and career outside of your expectations." I tried to step in and calm things down, but both of them were too fired up. That's when I made the biggest mistake of all. In a panic, I suggested that they both take a breather and talk things out privately in the guest room. I figured that some space and a calm environment would help, and they could hash things out without me getting in the way. So I made the suggestion, and they reluctantly agreed. Now, here's where I messed up. I didn't realize that giving them both space in the same room was the worst possible idea. In hindsight, I should have just told them both to go home, but I didn't. Instead, I told them to head into the guest room while I cleaned up the kitchen. That was when I made the fateful decision to let them talk things through. I went about my business, doing dishes and trying to block out the sound of muffled voices from the guest room. I didn't think much of it, assuming they were just getting all the yelling out of their system. Hours passed. I started to worry, but at the same time, I didn't want to intrude. I figured if I gave them space, they'd eventually resolve whatever issue they had. By the time the evening turned into night, I could tell something was off. I knocked on the guest room door, only to be met with an eerie silence. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. Finally, I opened the door to check on them. And there they were. My mom and Sarah, both sitting on opposite sides of the guest room, not talking to each other, not even looking at each other. It was like they were in some kind of Cold War. Both had their arms crossed, and neither of them said a word to me when I walked in. I asked if everything was okay, and my mom replied, "We're fine." But the way she said it sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't a "we're fine" in the usual sense. It was more like a "we're fine, but I don't ever want to speak to this woman again" kind of fine. I tried to lighten the mood by making a joke about how awkward things were, but it was clear that this situation wasn't something a joke could fix. I told them both that I was sorry for letting things escalate, but nothing helped. The evening ended with both of them heading to their respective corners of the apartment. Sarah stayed in her car for about 45 minutes before finally coming back inside. She didn't speak much that night, and we both went to bed in silence. It was one of the most awkward nights of my life. Now, fast forward 3 weeks. The fallout was worse than I could have imagined. My mom made it clear that she wasn't a fan of Sarah, and every time I tried to talk to her about it, she gave me one-word answers. Sarah, on the other hand, was just as upset. She kept saying that she didn't want to be around my mom unless it was absolutely necessary. The weirdest part was that both of them would pretend to get along when we were all in the same room together, but you could feel the tension from miles away. It was like walking on eggshells for the next few weeks, and every time I tried to bring them together to talk it out, it only made things worse. The worst part? I'm pretty sure my mom is still holding a grudge against Sarah, and Sarah is doing her best to avoid any situation that would require seeing my mom. My once happy, semi-peaceful life has been turned upside down, and I'm stuck in the middle of it all. So yeah, I messed up big time by thinking that putting them in the same room together would help. If I could go back and do it differently, I definitely would have kept them as far apart as possible. TLDR, I thought putting my mom and girlfriend in the same room to talk things through would resolve their issues. Instead, I ended up with 3 weeks of constant tension, awkward silences, and an ongoing feud between the two. My mistake. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.